Start recording. All right. Ladies and gentle viewers, welcome to Philosophy in Discord. This is a new podcast focused on three things: disagreement, conversation. What, are you playing music, Angus?
I don't think so. Do you hear music?
Yeah.
Let me check.
Oh, okay. Wait. There we go. Here we go. It was an ad on Twitch.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I
Here we
shouldn't have
go.
had anything.
Here we are. And we're going to start our music, our intro
Dude, do you
song.
get ads on your own Twitch?
Yeah, I do.
That's so funny.
Okay. Ladies and gentle viewers, welcome to Philosophy in Discord. This is a new podcast focused on three things: disagreement, conversation, and us, the speakers. The speakers are no more than they appear to be. They aren't by any means experts in their fields, and they have no intention on persuading each other and you, but if you do walk away with different opinions, don't feel ashamed. They're here to do three things. 1, respond to the prepared question. 2, answer some impromptu questions prepared by the mediator. And most important, represent themselves and their ideas. Over the course of the podcast life, we will see a large roster of speakers representing different political, philosophical, and economic ideologies. Tonight, the two gentlemen speaking are college students from two different geographic areas with different backgrounds and political philosophies. While not every episode will be politically motivated in nature, I've decided to benefit from political tension in my home nation. So tonight I will pose the question, what is the purpose of government? But before we answer that question, a little bit about our two speakers. Matt, would you like to begin?
Sure. So, a little bit about me. I grew up, my entire family have all been small business owners. That led me to lean a little bit more towards the capitalist side of the economic spectrum. And, well, growing up in this country, I think, has at least pretty greatly influenced my side on how much we should value individuality and freedom. I value it pretty highly. I think the answer to if someone else should get involved, the answer is typically no. Someone else should not get involved. Leave it up to them to make their own decisions. And that also kind of goes into my personal philosophy of Taoism. That's all about just kind of going with the flow and doing your best to self-improve yourself.
All right. Angus, would you like to give a little background about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I am a 18-year-old college student here at San Francisco State University. I grew up in a small kind of, decent-sized farming community called known as Salinas, California. For the most part, my parents were both pretty progressive Democrats, but we weren't, super left-leaning. They're all workers. We didn't really own businesses or anything like that, so there is a bit of a contrast there. My dad is a member of a union. My mom was a member of a union for a long time, so I'm very pro-worker when it comes to issues like that. Politically, I've kind of drifted, around the left here and there, since I was around 12 or 13. At my worst, I was a communist. At my, here and there, I flew all over the left, basically. Like, I did not sit until I kind of landed on libertarian socialism.
All right.
And
So,
I forgot to mention, I'm from Fresno.
yeah, and Matt attends Fresno State University. They are both college students. So, gentlemen, we gather you here tonight to answer a pretty important question. It's a question that is not specific to the American experience in any way. A question about simply what the purpose of governments in humanity are. Not just maybe why people form them, but what they're supposed to do. So, I guess let's get right to the meat. Speaker 1, Matt, would you like to begin?
Sure. My point of view, the government's responsibility should be nothing, but I do understand why what the government is supposed to do. The government is supposed to protect the people from physical violence from either other countries, today more so from possible companies, things like that, but today and throughout history you can see that that's kind of gone not the way that it was supposed to because of one central factor. Having power just leads to more and more and more power, and power corrupts people. So these governments have just been getting more and more powerful and just becoming more and more corrupt because of it. And that's why I don't believe that government should be playing a very big or at all a purpose in today's society. If you need food, you can grow it yourself if need be. If you need water, you can move where you live to live closer to a lake rather than living near a salt-filled ocean in the desert, which I mean I kind of do, but still. I could move if I needed to. And I government serves to take away money earned from the people so they could make themselves richer through taxation.
That. Continue.
Yeah, income tax, that's how the majority of the government gets its money, and that only serves to hurt the poor, where their income's getting taxed heavier, or not heavier per se, but every cent for the poor matters more than a few $100,000 for the rich, if that's getting taxed. The rich don't really care about that, but for the poor, those taxes mean everything. I know, living a minimum wage job, it can get kind of dicey month per month on that, like making it ends meet per month, and I don't really think the government should serve at least a very big role in the country.
So, Matt, to reiterate, whoa, what is this? Here we go. So, to reiterate, Matt, you don't think that the government should serve any role in the everyday citizen's life. You think that its purpose should be very small, if anything at all.
Yes.
Okay. So, sort of libertarian, maybe even anarchy there, because dismantling the government, that sort of thing. So let's move on to our second speaker,
Alright.
Angus.
So in an ideal world, the purpose of government, in my opinion, should be to provide an unbiased and fair decision when an issue involves more than one immediate group of people. The whole point of a democracy is that everyone gets their say in the matter, and that the masses should get what they really want, especially when it comes to issues like the environment and tax and basically anything that affects more than an immediate group of people. Like, that decision should not be made by one single person. And the government, another job of the government because of this, maybe inadvertently, is to provide reliable and efficient infrastructure, whether that be like roads and bridges and hospitals, schools. Hopefully in the future that would be like healthcare and more centralized systems like that. I think we have some work to go before we can actually do that properly, but in a perfect world, the government should be providing things that the free market, it would not be fair to let the free market, take advantage of the poor people in some areas, if that makes sense.
It does. Do you want to add anything onto that?
I think personally, right now, I would say that I am for the most part libertarian. In like I said, an ideal society, we'd be moving towards post-scarcity, globalization, like kind of a very freedom-focused world government that doesn't really interfere too much, just handles, the little things that we can't entrust to private companies.
Okay. So, let's get a little bit more specific here. We can talk, Matt, about the fact that governments are human nature. It's within all of us to want to find a social structure as human beings. Sort of like how a criticism of anarchy or libertarianism in such an extreme sense would be that humans naturally want to coalesce into these groups because we find some sort of deeper meaning in it, some sort of passion in our societal position. In America, people tend to wish for more wealth because it tends to mean that they're higher up in society. So if it is human nature to seek this out, how, then, can we avoid other people from forming governments? And how would you protect yourself if a group of humans, even tribal, got together to try and fight you and take what's yours? You'd be unable to own anything outside of a government, is what I'm trying to say. Lest a government forms to take it from you.
All right. So for the point about people wanting to fit into that society and the government helps create that, I actually think that's because we had a few power-hungry people in the past, and now we've just become accustomed to having a government in our lives, which I understand that's still gonna have people yearn for that since it's become so integrated into our culture. But I think if we slowly move away from having our government control our lives so much, that could help get rid of that culture of wanting that. And for the entire point of how would you possibly protect yourself against, like, say, a tribe of people, well, my entire philosophy is you shouldn't be able to violate another person's natural rights, which I believe are the right to life, liberty, and property. Life, obviously, you wouldn't kill another human. Liberty, you don't take away another person's freedom, so you can't, like, make another person your slave. And property, you have the ability to own things. Now, how can you enforce these rights to make sure that, like, someone does not try and take them away, or, like you said, a group of people tries to take them away? You kind of just have to defend it yourself. And it kind of sucks, but if you aren't able to defend it yourself, and I understand that there are going to be some people who are going to have much more problems with that, but there's always going to be problems with a society. I'm not claiming to be making a utopia. There is no such thing as a utopia. And I personally think system without any type of government would be the most morally just system, because no one is, like, having that higher power above their head just constantly taking it away, and any powers that would come up after those governments would be significantly smaller and much easier to dispel. The main problem that I have with my own, like, political standings of anarchist capitalist is all of the governments of the world would need to shut down or just be toppled over, or whatever happens to make the government not a part of everyday life anymore. That would all need to happen at the same time, or those governments would take advantage of just those other people who didn't have governments. So that's kind of a criticism I have of my own political leanings, but I still think the most morally just thing to do is not have any type of government that you owe nothing to, that you were just born into. You shouldn't need to owe them anything.
Good point. So your position is we didn't ask to be born to these governments. We didn't get to choose our geographic region. I'd say that's pretty fair. But just a quick secondary question: you point out that your values are life, liberty, and property, and that you have to defend it. But you have to defend it yourself. But what about the people who cannot? Don't you see the inherent problem. If somebody is to start taking slaves and break these rules, they gain a tremendous
Darwinism.
advantage. If somebody cheats or breaks this or doesn't have these values and decides instead to seize what is yours, they become more powerful, and then they become more able to seize more property, more liberty, and more life from others who can't defend it. Some would say the purpose of the government is to withhold these values, to uphold these, to make sure that nobody can take them from you. What would you say about that?
Just addressing the point of the government trying to uphold that. Today's governments all around the world just kind of trample over all of those rights all the time. With life, you have people being murdered who are innocent, being sent to the death penalty who are innocent. With liberty, you have people being unjustly jailed for something as simple as smoking marijuana of their own accord. And for property, same kind of deal. And just recently in America, there was the Japanese internment camps where Japanese citizens who were full citizens lost all of their property because America decided to get very, very, very suspicious of them. And going back to the point of how can you protect those if someone just tries to cheat the system? Generally, people are good people. The vast majority of the population does not want to see people suffer. And I believe that if something like that were to happen, you would see the people do their best to stop it. They would take up arms and try and put a stop to these unjust things that were happening.
All right. Excellent response. So sort of the capitalist response to the question of charity and social welfare. Angus, a few questions for you.
All right.
Let's cover, because Matt is an anarchist, he doesn't believe that the government really should have any responsibilities.
Okay.
So, but what responsibilities do you think the government should hold? What exactly should the government, should be the job of the government? What should they, what values should they uphold, and what things should they cover? Like, you know, you said education and healthcare and infrastructure, but what are the exact, specifically, responsibilities that a government should hold?
So again, this is in my ideal, perfect kind of, society here, which is, I think, in my opinion, achievable, reasonably so. The job of the government should be to provide, reliable infrastructure, so roads, bridges, hospitals, schools. You wouldn't like a lot of anarcho-capitalists will say that, these things can be done by a free market. You see that, like, when private roads and private hospitals and these things, do appear, quality is not assured by any kind of standardization. The likelihood of failure is significantly higher a lot of the time, simply because because of the lack of standardization. Like defense of the people, another thing. Like, we can't really have or rely on like a private police force to really go around and uphold basic laws. Like, I do think that we should be free to do a lot of things that we want to do, but anything that really like harms other people, like aside from yourself, like if you want to harm yourself, I think that's reasonable. But if it harms other people, I think there should be a law kind of regarding what you can and can't do, and like we can't rely on private enforcement or just people to like kind of self-regulate on some of these things.
Good answer. So basically, mediation and regulation amongst sort of interactions amongst the populace.
Right, and I know that answer was a bit scattered, but it basically is that humanity can't really be trusted to self-regulate, and
But what regulation specifically should the government be in charge of? Say, like healthcare or food regulations, education. what do you think the government needs to take care of? What do you think is the responsibility of the government? Is it the responsibility of the government to punish prisoners, to rehabilitate them? Is it their responsibility to make the markets fair? Could you just give like a short, concise list maybe of like things you'd like to see the government or any government do? The government
Honestly,
you live
like,
in.
our current government, I do agree with a lot of like a lot of the things that we do now, I think are there for a good reason. Like, we do occasionally step into the market to regulate the economy and protect some of our interests, because otherwise you get things like, the Great Depression, 2008. We have recessions that occasionally pop up because the free market has failed. People choose to take power into their own hands effectively in situations like that. And to, like, GDP, which is a decent measurement of, like, the quality of life effectively in a country, or at least generally is. The United States is kind of an odd outlier there, but when that when that measurement is not regulated, it's dangerous. We're just kind of leaving it open to chance.
Okay. So now I have some questions for both of you. Even though our first speaker, Matt, doesn't believe in even upholding governments or that they should even exist, I'm going to ask them as if you believe there should be some form of it. So you mentioned earlier, Matt, life, liberty, and property are your values. And Angus, you sort of touched on healthcare and education. What values should the government hold? What should they prioritize? What should they believe in? Is it freedom? Is it safety for their citizens? Is it protecting people from menaces beyond the borders? Is it to make sure everybody's healthy and not dying of illness? Or maybe you could even go more rudimentary: honor, freedom, respect. What values do you think the government should hold? We'll begin with Matt.
I personally think the government should help out with the free market. I understand that the free market isn't perfect. It's had a few hiccups in the past. So I think if the government did exist, they should help regulate against monopolies from happening. We know exactly why those aren't a good thing. And I think they should definitely help uphold at least my values that I've stated previously: life, liberty, and property. Everyone is deserving of those three things. Everyone has a right to live their own life. Everyone has a right to choose their own choices. And if those choices impede on other people's rights, I think if the government were a thing in this situation, I think they should step in and protect those liberties from people who would try and trample upon them. And I also think everyone has the right to property, so slavery doesn't happen. And also, so people can own things. People can start up their own businesses if they want to. They can choose to make things if they want to. They can choose to do whatever they want with their property. If they want to smoke a joint, they can go smoke a joint whenever the fuck they want.
Okay, so maybe a brief summary. You believe heavily in freedom. The government should exist to protect people's freedom, both in the markets from monopolies who would oppress them by making them pay outrageous prices maybe, or conglomerates that team up to oppress a certain class of people, and to protect the freedoms just in general of humans to do as they will. Angus, what sort of values do you think the government is responsible for?
So, like, a lot of my thoughts on what values the government should hold are, I share those with Matt. Like the government should be there to uphold life, liberty, property. They should be focused on the freedom part especially, because, like, once life is included in freedom, I think, in my opinion. And as soon as you have corporations stepping in, like monopolizing industries in certain markets, you have some of that freedom taken away. As soon as you have overly authoritarian politicians coming in and getting into the government, you have some of that freedom getting taken away. And we need to find a balance between, like, logically, stepping in and limiting people and letting them, make their own decisions. Because there are some things that, people are going to want to do, but they are going to endanger other people. We are going to need to stop them from doing that to protect other people's, life, liberty, and property.
Okay. So again, life, liberty, and property we see. This is probably because you both fall on the libertarian end. So, another question. Is it reasonable for the government to promise their citizens anything? Examples: education, freedom, healthcare, security. If so, what promises should be made? And to what end should the government secure them? How much should be sacrificed? And just another question to add on: what if they can't ensure them? What if something happens, like, say, a militia rises up within its borders and the government's unable to control it? Or, how can the government secure these things that you think they should promise their citizens? Matt, do you want to start?
Sure. For things that governments should promise, I don't think they should necessarily 100% promise anything, because things can go wrong. Recessions can happen in the economy. Like you said, militias can rise up and violate freedom. So I don't think governments should 100% try and promise anything. But I think that they should at least try and say that we're going to try and do this. And I think that they should try and, like I said before, protect the freedoms of the people, life, liberty, and property. And to what extent, I don't think there should be a death penalty, just because we've gotten criminal cases wrong before, and it's happened plenty of times. I think the jail sentencing is just fine for if you're trying to, if you are found guilty of trying to trample on someone else's natural rights, then you should be sent to jail. But if you're later proven innocent, you should be taken out. But obviously, the initial point is you are innocent until you're proven guilty by that system. And I do actually personally like the system that America has, where it has its own people come in and they choose whether this person is innocent or guilty. I think that's a very good system that we have in place, because it takes the power away from the government in deciding that fate. So if someone's doing something against the government that they don't like, they can't just send them to jail forever. And on the point of what if a militia rises up to try and take away those things, I think that's, personally, I'm a very big believer in the Second Amendment. So I think the people should definitely help out with protecting the values of their particular country. Kind of like what happened in the Revolutionary War, similar to what happened there, where, except in this case, we were the militia in that war instead of there was a militia rising up. I think the people should fight for what they believe in and what will treat them better. So if that militia is able to bring better things than the current government to the table that would better protect their lives, their liberties, and their properties, I think, in a better manner, I think that they should fight for that militia instead of their government. But if that militia wants to take away those natural rights, I think that they should do their best to protect their own country.
All right, very good. So again, a very libertarian, take care of it yourself sort of attitude. Angus, what do you have to say about the topic?
Right.
What should be promised by the government?
Like, similar to what Matt said, promises. A promise is kind of a strong phrasing. I think what really should be said is we will strive towards or do our best at, because things do happen. The government will break some of these promises inevitably, but what is promised should be, a stable life, like a protected, life to a degree. Like you should have available education, you should have available healthcare, um, infrastructure so that you can go about your life should be provided. You should be defended from foreign threats and domestic threats. So, a police and military force, um, emergency services, readily available, and ultimately in the near future, I think we should have a promise, like, you know, life, like leaving it up to chance or leaving it up to, oh, I could do this, or basically like leaving it up to Darwinism should not be as prevalent as it has been. Like universal basic income, I think, is reasonable and should be available at some point in the future, along with provided healthcare, and for the most part, like the basics should be provided by the government. Like that should be promised at some point, to the best ability of the government.
Okay. Okay. Um, one more question. It particularly has to do with the philosophy of government. What sacrifices should humans be willing to make in the name of cooperation to live together in harmony? So, Matt, you mentioned earlier not impeding on these values, but what sacrifices should humans be expected to make to live in cities, to live in these massive cooperations, which we call societies?
I personally think those sacrifices should be kept to a minimum. I think like I said, I don't believe in the death penalty at all. I think it's completely stupid, especially because of if we get something wrong, this person is innocent, and I value an innocent person staying alive much more than I value a guilty person getting the death penalty. I think if people agree to, if they are accused and found guilty of doing something wrong by the people, not by the government, that they should be sent to jail. I think that's one of the sacrifices that people should have to make, and I think that people also would need to make the sacrifice of respecting other people's property, to not say throw a Molotov at your neighbor's house because you didn't like that they bought a new and better car than you, for example. That's not a very good example, but it's just one I came up with off the top of my head. But so like respecting your neighbor, not blowing up their house, and agreeing that if you are found guilty of violating someone else's natural rights, that you should be sent to jail.
All right, speaker two, Angus.
Right. So, sorry. Can you say the initial question again?
Yeah, what sacrifices should people be willing to make to live in the name of cooperation to live in societies?
Okay. So compromises are like inevitable whenever you're dealing with a decision that has to be made, between two opposing parties. Like that's just a given. So unless you eliminate one of the parties, you will have to cooperate. I think you should negotiate on what should you really have to sacrifice when you have to live in one of these situations, essentially. So leave it up to democracy, effectively. Like vote on what you are willing to give up amongst your group, and then decide with the other group, are you willing to accept this compromise? Like, it should be, for the most part, this should be up to the people. Like, it should not be left up to like a centralized authority. Like, if the government is not democratic, it should not be left up to the government in that matter.
Okay, very fair. Let's pull up this. So, I think we only have about two more questions that I want to ask. That is, my second to final question is, what changes would you see made to your government, the one that you live in, to make it better for you, I guess? What changes would need to be made to the modern American government, because that's where everyone here lives, to make it adhere to your values more? What things would you want to see changed here in America if you had the power to? Matt, you want to start us off?
Sure. I think the Fourth Amendment, which is you can't search someone's house without reasonable cause or a warrant, I think that amendment kind of gets trashed on the most these days and is cared for the least. Like, in the news, we're hearing about either the left or right suppressing the First Amendment or one of the other amendments. I know Kanye West just recently tweeted about how he believes the 13th Amendment shouldn't exist. But I believe the Fourth Amendment is something that we definitely need to look at and respect more. It's one of the biggest amendments that keeps the government from impeding on like our individual rights, because obviously by myself can't take down the entire American military, but because we all of us in America respect the Constitution, whether you agree with all of the amendments or not, because we all have agreed that the Constitution has laws that we will abide by, that if you break that, you are doing something wrong. That helps protect me from the government. So I think the Fourth Amendment needs to be strengthened. And as a personal believer of the Second Amendment, I think that there should be actions taken to get rid of gun-free zones. I think that they do nothing but just lead people who are going to shoot places up, go, oh, I'm going to target that because no one on that area is going to have a gun. So it's just going to be, when do the police get here? So I think that should be another thing that is changed in my ideal situation.
All right. Angus, we'll move on to you. Do you remember the question?
Right, yes. So to make, the United States of America more libertarian socialist friendly, in my opinion, for the most part, we should do away with things like, the war on drugs, any laws that kind of contribute to that. It's still going on. Like, we need to deregulate most, if not all, of the current regulated substances, things that give the government reason to go and take authority away from people. That implies to things like, the FCC and like, actual like free speech limiting by the government. Like there are, the First Amendment is a thing, but you are still limited to what you can do in the First Amendment. This is mainly around the libertarian side of libertarian socialism, but like we aren't as free as we really think we are when it comes to what you can do on the internet and what you can, put in your body and what you can put out there in the world. Like in the name of anti-terrorism, we have gone and, basically started spying on all of our citizens to try to limit that to some degree, which I think, sure, that might be useful to do, but you're taking away the same freedoms that you're trying to protect. It's kind of, it's kind of funny if you think about it. Moving on to the socialism side of libertarian socialism, I think we do need to start providing more secular education. We do need to start putting our tax money, which I do think taxes is a necessary thing. I get the point of anarcho-capitalists saying that taxation is theft, or whatever the phrase you want to use there is, but we need to provide services to the people because not everyone can feed themselves or house themselves to the same degree that the strong and lucky and wealthy can.
I just wanted to add on to mine. I completely agree with the decriminalization of like nonviolent drug use. I think that if you decide to use any kind of substance on yourself, if it's nonviolent, that should not be criminalized at all.
Very good. So, my last point before we move on to your guys' questions for each other, and then I think we'll do another segment after when we just sort of talk about the podcast, is when I asked you guys what the purpose of governments were, none of you said to represent the citizens who live in them. None of you said to uphold the values of the citizens who live in them. You all said to uphold, or you both said to uphold my values. Now, that might just be the purpose of this podcast, which is to find out where you stand.
Can I comment on that briefly?
Yes.
So the part of the libertarian socialism part where I bring up like democracy and like all decisions should be left up to basically the people's decision. That's basically what I meant. In some weird, I personally think that libertarian socialism is kind of like a human default to a degree. Like we are going to kind of drift towards that naturally over time. But if, by some reason I think like the people decide that they want an authoritarian dictator, I think, hey, that's what they want. Democracy is democracy. They should be allowed to put themselves under that.
Actually, going off on that point, I disagree, because that's not including every citizen within that. So, say that you just need the majority to vote in an authoritarian government, and you get that 51%, but the other 49% of the country doesn't want that authoritarian government under that kind of philosophy. You'd just be letting that authoritarian government happen, completely ignoring that barely minority amount of people.
All right. Well, you both sort of asked my question, or answered my question for me, which was, how do you feel about what the populace thinks of their government? So we can move on to if you gentlemen have any questions for one another.
I'll let you shoot first if you'd like.
All right. My question really is, how can we, because your entire thing is people wanting to be selfless and the government like kind of helping people along with that, right?
Right.
So how can we trust the government not to abuse this power of basically being that transferring tool between the people helping each other?
As it is, we kind of see the government as a separate entity, as like its own person, almost like, realistically in a democracy, like the government is we the people, or it should be we the people. We typically talk about it now as, oh, the government, it's like it's a separate thing. It's something dirty almost. We should be seeing the government as, this is us. We are the government. We are making this government decision. I think we need to make some changes to how our government is set up so we can get to that point, but ultimately it should be like, the government is the people. It's not, Donald Trump. It's not, whatever politician you want to name. That's not the government. The government is us.
All right. And also, wouldn't increasing taxes, which kind of goes against liberty, how would that fit into, because from my point of view at least, I see socialism as a form of authoritarianism, as the government forcibly taking away your goods to give to someone else to try and make sure that everyone has a fair share in an ideal world. Doesn't that kind of conflict?
It can. I think that you have a very valid point, and I do agree that, if you don't agree with it, I think it should be, to agree somewhat opted out of, you should be able to opt out of some parts of taxation, or at least you should be able to decide what part of the government your money goes to a limited degree, of course. But ultimately, I think it is in the best interest of most people to, help their fellow man, help society. A more educated society is a healthier society, one with less crime, higher income rates. Ultimately, if you, it's like you're growing something when you throw your money at it.
All right. Are there any questions you want to ask me?
Let me think. So, when you talk about anarcho-capitalism, you kind of you talked about how anarchy, or you want to dismantle government, because you see government as this authoritarian kind of figure. How do you say we prevent authoritarian figures from just rising up out of this anarchy?
kind of like I mentioned during the questions, I think that the people are generally going to be are good people, and if someone is abusing any of those natural rights that we've both been talking about and both agree with to certain extents, that they will help defend those rights against the people. I think that I'm a very self-deterministic person. I think that people should take their lives into their own hands and create their own life for themselves. But like you mentioned, there are some people who can't do that nearly as well. Like someone who is, say, disabled at the legs, so they cannot work nearly as efficiently as someone who can. I think people are going to be good people, and they will help that person. Not every single person in the world is a selfish psychopath. While there still are some people out there like that, I don't think the majority of the populace is. I think the vast majority of people want to help other people, and without people thinking that the government's just going to hold their hand everywhere, that this would take into an effect a lot more.
And so this is kind of a follow-up on that. Like when you say like people are like regarding like an authoritarian figure kind of rising up in an anarchy, you expect people to like individually fight against this authoritarian figure. Wouldn't they have to organize to do so? And would that not turn into like a form of government in itself?
Well, I agree that to combat whatever threat would be happening, they would need to organize, but that doesn't mean they need to stay organized. They can just dismantle themselves afterwards, once again, and it would, especially because there wouldn't be any government in this situation. Lots of these things would be happening on a much smaller scale, so it'd more likely be city to city. So it'd be much easier to dismantle, and if we're already used to not having any government by our side, it'd be kind of the natural progression and the next step. Once this threat is defeated, we just go back to the way we're living and make sure that our life, liberty, and property rights are not being trampled upon.
But my belief when it comes to that issue in particular is that there is always going to be, a malevolent authoritarian group, kind of cropping up or, holding power in these anarchist states. Like, you think of, like, I guess it's not really an accurate representation of anarchy, but you think of, like, Mad Max, and there's always, a gang of, crazed psychopaths in flaming cars. Like, there's always a group of people that is, in a way, a authoritarian government.
And there's always going to want to be people who want to do right and protect other people's rights.
Yeah, but it's going to be a constant back and forth. Like, why dismantle the government when you're always going to have to defend it from something?
There's always a back and forth in today, and it's on a much larger scale that could end the entire planet. Just look at, say, the US or Russia do something that particularly ticks them off. We can end the entire world with just a click of a button. In an anarcho state, that's not infinitely less likely to happen, but it's severely less likely to happen.
Yeah, and another question is, who empowers America and Russia? Like, why do they feel like they get to end the world just because the other one pissed them off? Like, some might say the population, but their populations respectively. But why should they have the power to do that?
Well, I personally don't believe that they should have the power.
I know.
Shouldn't?
It's
Yeah, but
sort of a question for Angus, actually.
Oh, I was gonna do it under the framework that I believe that they should have the power to do that.
Oh, okay. Continue then.
All right. So assuming that I believe that they do, I think it is under the assumption that they themselves don't want to die. It's the entire thing that happened throughout the Cold War. They don't want to die, so they're not going to push the button, and vice versa. And that just kind of keeps each other at bay and this is a much better solution than just having one person rule over all of the people. I think that this competition between the two countries has led to Not necessarily more prosperity, but more advancement between the two countries,
Right. Well,
respectively.
yeah. Well, like, what I sort of mean is what gives America and Russia the right to end the world over a disagreement between each other when there's a lot more people than just the American government and the Russian government on Earth. It's sort of I'm sort of agreeing with you. It's very violent that is a possibility that America and or Russia or anybody with nuclear capabilities could sort of seize up the Earth and take it from everyone who inhabits it, despite the fact that not even the citizens probably want to nuke each other.
And I'd agree with you on that. I couldn't really answer that because I could not tell you why, in particular, Russia or the U.S. should have the power to just completely end the world.
Well, I think the answer to someone more who would disagree with it is sort of simply because they can. They developed the nuclear capabilities. They're more intelligent. They're more capable than the other nations. But since no one here believes that, we don't have to delve into that argument very much. An argument for another podcast, perhaps.
Right.
If Angus wants to answer.
Yeah.
You know, this is kind of a connection here between organized society and the development of like weapons and technology in general, but without the need to combat larger and larger enemies, we would not have developed, you know, firearms technology, explosives technology, ultimately, you know, nuclear weaponry. I think if, you know, by some logic, you know, by some miracle that we did not, you know, form societies at some point, we would just be still using rocks and sticks.
Okay. So,
Without any organized collaboration, you know, in the name of progress, you know, in the name of society, or ultimately what would have became government, we would have, you know, very little, if at all, technology.
I would take contention with the. We're sort of in a more free-form discussion now, so I think that this is the perfect time to move into another segment, which is just going to be basically rambling.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
So, I would take contention with the statement that it's in the name of progress, when in reality, I think that a better way to phrase that is it's in the name of, say, security or effectiveness. The scientists and you know, developers, from the rock to the sharp stick to the sharp rock, you know, they sort of do these in the name of security and the name of efficiency to more efficiently defend themselves or to more efficiently take from other people. You could call that progress, but I would call it backwards.
Well, isn't defeating your enemies and securing your own well-being progress, you know, by some definition?
I guess it depends on your perspective.
That was a little bit of what I was trying to get at, that because we both have these Russia and the US have these world-ending weapons, we don't want to use them because we all live on the same Earth, for now at least. So I think it's a pretty good deterrent from the other one from using it. So I think it's very much better than just one country having all the nukes. I think it's good, especially now that there are more and more countries that are acquiring nuclear missiles, because that just adds in some situations I can see it being bad because it's
we're gonna discuss the North Korea situation right now.
With the North Korea situation, the situation with Palestine and Jerusalem, that could definitely heat up really quickly. But I think if a country isn't like at the brink of trying to, in the situation of North Korea, it's mostly going to be used as a deterrent from other countries to try and use those nuclear missiles.
Or at least that's what they'd lead you to believe. Ultimately, it comes down to you have to have faith that everyone on the world stage is a rational actor, or you're going to feel completely doomed.
And I also think that with how long we've had these nuclear missiles ready to fire at each other, we've definitely made a lot of progress with being able to counteract them and stop the missiles before they can hit big cities. And America. I know there's one particular system that's a little bit outdated, but we're currently working on updating called THAAD.
Yeah.
Yeah, that we're putting in South Korea to just in case North Korea gets a little handsy on their big red button.
Yeah. Okay. So, do you have any more? I guess we didn't really finish your questions for Matt before we moved on to senseless rambling, Angus.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else you'd like to ask?
Not really. No.
Okay. Final
Well, Angus,
segment.
how's your day going?
Yeah,
That's my question.
go ahead.
My day has been kind of odd, kind of irregular. Woke up, made breakfast, went to the gym, came home, filled out some job applications, and then sat down, and here we are.
Sounds
Matt?
like a pretty decent day.
Tell us about yours, I suppose.
I got to go to a wedding reception today, which was a lot of fun. I got to hang out with one of my friend's family, and I drove up to Sacramento, and that's what I did all day.
Beautiful. Before we conclude, almost exactly at the hour mark, do you guys want to say anything to me? Any, tips for how to maybe make it more structured? Should it be more structured, less structured? Anything else any final notes before we conclude?
I think that you could separate the questions a little bit better because at times you were just kind of asking us 3 questions at once, and I was struggling to remember each and every question.
All right.
Right, maybe simpler, more structured sections, and then maybe closer to the end, one of these rambling, more open-ended question sections. I think, having some, very, hard set questions at the beginning to kind of determine a baseline is a good idea.
All right. So, more structure.
Kind of going from structure to less structure over time. Yeah.
All right. I guess that's the end of the first episode of Philosophy in Discord. Thanks to all the people who watched all the way through. This is going to go up on YouTube probably tomorrow.